Welcome to Real People, Real Life, where everyday conversations lead to extraordinary insights. We're all about digging into the lives of regular people who've achieved success on their own terms. This is Real People, Real Life. And now your host, Ryan Chereau.
So, Steve, we are in a situation where American health is declining. A lot of people think that's diet. And I met you through a mutual friend, and you have been in the organic farming business for how many years?
55 years.
55 years. Before it was trendy. Before people actually, now in California, everyone does organics. You were doing it 55 years ago. Okay.
Which is the largest agricultural valley in the United States.
So how did that all become? Were you in farming your whole life? Is this something that as a kid you did farming?
I was raised on a farm. And so being raised on a farm as a small kid, I was with my dad practically the whole time. And so he was a small operator. He had 120 acres and he irrigated, he drove tractors, he did everything. And of course, while he did all this, I would drive on the side of the tractor and I would just love being with my dad and then irrigating, how to irrigate and all of these different jobs that were done on the farm. And so as a kid, I learned all of that. And so, we got through high school and it was time to go to college. And of course, I thought I was going to go to Davis, University of California, Davis, because my uncle was head of nematology at the department there. And he said, well, you got to come to Davis.
What is nematology?
Nematology is the studying of pathogenistic root-eating insects. They eat the roots of the plant. And so they form galls on it, and they're really bad. But anyway, that's what nematology is. And anyway, he thought I was going to come to, UC Davis, but my one of the top professors at Fresno State says, "Oh no, you've got to come to Fresno State." And so they were both, pushing for me to come there. And he says, "No, I want you to be the first Delano table grape grower to graduate from Fresno State." So there had been other growers that have gone to Fresno State. They'd make it like a semester or a year, and and they were partying and having a good time. They really didn't need to have an education at a farm to come back to, so it was not something that they needed for a job. They were owners, and I was in the same situation. So Vince Petrucci, who was my professor at Fresno State, said, "Look, I just want you to be the first Delano table grape grower to graduate from Fresno State." And I says, "Oh, okay." Well, I said, that sounds like that's a lot of fun. And of course, I didn't realize what college was going to be like when I left from a little high school in Delano High School, and then go to a college. And then, of course, I realized that, there was more than an education to learn when you were there and partying and having fun and doing all these things and just having a wonderful time. And so when I came back from college, my dad said, "Well, it's time to go to work." But before I went there, my dad said, "Look, when you graduate, you can have he said, you can have anything you want as a present," thinking that I wasn't going to graduate, that I was going to be like the rest of the Delano table grape growers, that I was going to party and drop out my second year or something. And so anyhow, I graduated, and he says, "Well, what do you want to do?" He says, "Dad, I want to go to Europe, and I want to get a Eurail pass, and I want to go to every farming place that has grapes in Europe." Wow. He says, okay. So my dad, so I'm heading off to Europe with my backpack. Of course, I'm a skier. And of course, I wanted to do skiing. It was wintertime. It was November. And I had my year rail pass, and I went to every major wine grape growing region, and the interesting thing about it is that I had my two professors from UC Davis and from Fresno State that gave me names of all of the chateau, high-end Louis Latour type.
So these are wine grape regions.
And so they had my name, ahead of time, because they sent it. Says, Steve Pavich, student from graduated, wants to come, and we want you to show him the vineyard.
Sure.
And so I'll never forget. Louis Latour was the first one that I went to in France, and it was in Burgundy. And I showed up, and they says, "Oh yeah, we have your guest house ready for you." And I says, "Oh, my guest house?" I said, "I got a free place to stay." I mean, I'm just out of college. I had no money, and my dad gave me a gas or a credit card for emergency to use, and I had some cash. Anyway, I was staying in the chalet.
On the vineyard?
On the vineyard.
Wow.
There at Louis Latour, and then they gave me a complete tour and wine tasting and everything, and let's look at the color and let's look at the taste, and the tannins are high, and all this expert language. And of course I was acting like I knew everything, and I didn't know anything. Well, I did know something. I mean, I did graduated from Fresno State. I did do more than just a little partying, or maybe a lot of partying, but anyway.
Rite of passage.
Yeah. So, that was the kind of thing that I did. And I went from vineyard to vineyard. And then in the meantime, I was doing, I went into Paris just to see what Paris was like. And then the south of France, which is, and then Barcelona, and then into Spain and the Costa del Sol. And I saw all these just incredible vineyards that I wanted to understand why they were what they were. And I realized that the soil was the key to everything, that every place I went to. And they call it terroir, which was the natural soil that they had, and they put the grapes in, and of course you get $100 bottle of wine out of it. You go like, well, what's so special about that? And so what you did is I learned a lot about, the soil is everything. It's not about the wine. I mean, the winemaking, you have to be a really good winemaker, don't get me wrong. But if you don't have good grapes to go in to crush, you don't get good wine. So they had this special uniqueness about the soils. And so I was asking questions, and it's surprising how little they actually knew about their own soils. They just knew that when they planted the grapes there, that they would get this, but they didn't know that they had the different ratios of nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium and trace elements and all these other things that were just in the right proportion.
Now, is that something that you had learned at Fresno State?
No, that was not. We weren't. We learned very little about nutrition. So nutrition in soil was not an important thing. What was important when I was at Fresno State, I learned all about chemicals. Mm-hmm. How to kill bugs with a chemical, how to put a commercial fertilizer on to put nitrogen in the plant, and it was nothing about composting or manures or cover crops or any of these things that were uniquely different than what I was taught at Fresno State. Now, that's not to try to put down Fresno State, but, their money was coming from the big pesticide chemical companies. And so they would fund a lot of things. And obviously, if you're going to fund something, you want to make sure that whatever you're funding comes back to you. And so we were taught basically how to farm chemically.
Which is what a majority of our farming is today, correct?
No, No, it's all different today, but that's been a
then.
long evolution that's happened from the late 60s, early 70s to today. So when I got home, and I'll never forget, I said, I had all the chemical, everything, okay? And I said, well, Dad, I says, we're going to get Chevron Chemical, Chevron Chemical Company, which was the largest fertilizer chemical company in the United States. And of course, I knew them, and I knew the head guy, and of course, they turned me on to all of their research people. And so the first year that I farmed totally chemically. I says, Dad, we're going to put on, triple 16, which is nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and we're going to make this chemical thing and we're going to make a chemical soup to where our grapes are going to be the best grapes that you can ever possibly have. So what happened after the first season, along August or so, the grapes were horrible. They were just absolutely, we had what we would call waterberries. That's grapes that instead of them being firm, they were watery and they didn't have flavor and they just didn't have anything.
And these are table grapes.
These are table grapes. These are all eating grapes, okay? So the table grapes that we had were just horrible. And my dad was looking at me. He said, well, what did you learn at Fresno State? I says, look at how these grapes are just horrible. So I was just like sitting there saying to myself, I'm going to put my mother and my father in the poorhouse by what I was supposed to know when I came back from Fresno State and all this chemical stuff. And I thought that it was good. And I had the head people from Chevron Chemical Company, the best people, the best chemicals, the best everything. And the grapes were absolutely horrible. So whenever you live in the physical world, you are always thinking physical, chemical fertilizers, the physical, you're thinking of this, you're thinking of that. And so sometimes I wasn't particularly a very religious person. I was raised a Catholic, and of course I went to church and I, had my communions and all my other stuff that I had there at from the standpoint of any religious backing. But I said to myself, I says, I've got to do something. I got to figure out what's wrong here and what's happening with our farming operation. These grapes are horrible. And I'll never forget, it was a Saturday afternoon, August 30th. It was my mom's birthday. And I was just emotionally distraught because I says, I'm bringing all this information home that was wrong. And the grapes were horrible. And so I was driving around and I got out of the pickup and I just sat underneath the grapevine and I prayed to God and I said, please, dear God, give me an answer. I said, I'm going to put mom and dad in the poorhouse. I said, what I learned is not right. I need for you to give me the answer. I mean, it's still very emotional. I mean, every time I think about it, it was so intense about how I asked God for an answer. And anyway, I got up and I had a few tears and I just says, wow. I go, what am I going to do now? So I went home and, went to bed that night. And the next morning, my dad would get the Fresno Bee every Sunday. The Fresno Bee was a newspaper and it had a section in it called The Country Life. The Country Life section of Fresno Bee was dedicated to agriculture. That was back in the day when the newspaper people respected agriculture and they actually wrote about it and they had this whole thing. So anyway, I'm looking at the newspaper and I'm reading The Country Life and I'm sitting here. And anyway, some guy had an article in there that they interviewed him with. His name was Watt McGugan, and he talked about putting carbon dioxide in the water and organic matter and compost and limestone. And I've never heard about limestone ever being used in agriculture in the San Joaquin Valley. It was always the Midwest. It was the Midwestern thing because it was calcium. And the university thought that the San Joaquin Valley had enough calcium. Well, it just so happened that we didn't, and I didn't know. But this is the day after I prayed, and all of a sudden, here's this newspaper article that's just saying, I got to call this guy up, find out, who the heck is this guy, Watt McGugan. So I end up somehow getting his phone number, and I call him up. He comes down Monday the next day. Immediately comes down. And so I said, well, who is this guy? And of course, today you Google everything and you get the background of everything,
sure,
criminal record, everything, but we didn't have Google back then. And so I had to ask around, and I knew somebody in Fresno that knew him. And he says, oh, no, Watt McGugan. He says, Watt McGugan worked on the Manhattan Project. I said he was a chemist that worked on the Manhattan Project. And of course, the Manhattan Project was the building of the nuclear bomb.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, I guess he must have been pretty smart because they had 25 chemists that were part of the group that did it. And the story that, and of course, I asked him about it. He says, oh, yeah. He says, I worked as a chemist. He comes down the next day, and so we get into the conversation. And I said, well, what happened? I said, were you part of it? He says, oh, no, I only worked there like a couple months. And I realized what I was doing with building something that could kill millions of people. And I said, well, what happened? He says, I was coming home one day from, on the cable car there in Chicago. And he's coming there, and the lady in front of him was getting off the cable car, and he was getting off, and she fell off, and she tripped and fell and hit her head on the curb and was completely knocked out. And so he gets down there, and he takes and feels her pulse, and there's no pulse. And I said, then what happened? And he said, I got this message from God at that point to put my hands on her and give her the healing health of life. And anyway, she woke up, and he couldn't believe that happened, that his hands had energy force going through it to do something like that. And he came home that night to his wife, and he says, we're packing our bags, and we're going back to Fresno. And I'm going to do something with my life that's going to make a difference to the planet. And so he came back home, and he had all this information, and nobody at that time at the university knew anything about limestone. Nobody knew anything about carbon dioxide and how it worked in the water and how it could treat sodium in the water. Instead of using sulfuric acid, which was a very toxic acid, that's what the farmers were all using, use carbon dioxide or somehow have carbon dioxide come in the water or use it in farming practices. Because carbon dioxide could adjust the high sodium content through carbonic acid to lower the sodium in the plant and in the ground, and so the plant would grow better. And limestone was calcium carbonate, which was the real source of calcium instead of gypsum. Of course, everybody was using gypsum at the time. Now, I don't mean to be getting too technical, but the bottom line is that I bought into all his chemistry. He comes down the next day and says, you need to use limestone. He says, you're completely short of limestone in your soil, and you need to get the calcium in it. And of course, looking at my grapes, I says, what do I have to lose? Grapes are horrible. I said, I'm going to break my mom and dad. And I said, so we ordered, several truckloads of limestone. We put it on. And within 30 days, it completely changed the grapes around to where the grapes became firm, they became tasty, and the entire plant changed around. The ground was taking water. You could smell the soil. It had an earthy smell to it. And I says, wow.
And so the limestone is naturally injecting carbon dioxide into the soil.
It's a powder. It's a powder. Like gypsum is a powder, and you spread it over the ground. And then when you irrigate, the ground reacts with the limestone that's on the surface of the soil, and it gets up into the plant, or not into the plant, but into the root system, and the roots feed upon this soil with limestone, and all of a sudden the calcium gets up into the plant. And the next thing you know, the cell walls of the microscopic cells that are in the plant have thicker walls. They have, instead of watery cells, they have constituency to them. And all of a sudden, the plant completely changed around. And so I said, wow, I can't believe the grapes are like changed within such a short amount of time. How could this possibly be? I didn't learn this at Fresno State. And so, of course, Watt, being the genius that he was, forgot more than all my professors in chemistry knew. But I didn't really, I didn't know who this guy was. He didn't have any money. He wasn't making any sales and everything. He just could have been somebody off the street. But obviously, if he did work chemistry, but he wasn't successful in what he did. So I says, let's go to Fresno State, Watt. I says, I'd like for you to meet my chemistry professor that I had at Fresno State, and we could talk to him. Okay. This is on a Saturday. So I invited my chemistry teacher. I said, let's go to the classroom. And I got this guy that's supposed to be a genius chemist, and I want to know if he knows his stuff. Oh, yeah, no problem, Steve. I'll go. He says, even though I got a C+ in chemistry, I hated chemistry. And, I wasn't good at it. But so we went to the classroom. Nobody else in the classroom except them. And he had 3 huge blackboards on there. And so, the chemist says, okay, Watt, well, give me your chemistry that you have when you know the stuff that you know about this here. And so Watt wrote this chemical equation on the board. And then my chemistry teacher, he wrote the answer to that. And then he, of course, wrote another answer to that and another answer to another. They filled up 3 blackboards worth of chemical equations. And I was looking at it, and I was, of course, lost in space. And then the chemist from Fresno State finally says, I give up. I've never seen that chemical equation ever in anywhere that I've ever seen. That is unbelievable what you know. And I said to myself, well, if that's coming from the head of the Department of Chemistry and the chemistry teacher that I had, I said, this guy must know what he's talking about. So then that's when I went back and I said, well, let's put it on, let's go for it. And we did. And so we're almost broke, and the grapes were horrible. And all of a sudden they turned around, and the next year we doubled our yield.
And this is a natural process. It's not actual using manufactured chemicals. It's the limestone. And it's
calcium carbonate was a product at that time, which was a byproduct from sugar beets. And so they would take sugar beets, and the waste product of sugar beets would be limestone. It would be about 75% calcium. And then they had also a mine calcium that was 99% calcium. And we ultimately went to that, after using that. So anyway, when I started using that, I had no idea what the word organic was, really. Nobody was talking about organic farming. Oh, those are hippies, farming 2-acre plots someplace.
Yeah, little communes.
Yeah, communes. So, what happened to me with that was that I said, well, that's cool. I'm not going to get too excited about this. But so the calcium carbonate that we put on there, like I said, doubled our yields within 1 year. And tripled our yields, and the quality of the fruit went from being in the lower 25% tier of table grape growers into the upper 10% tier of table grape growers within 1 year.
And how many acres are we talking about?
Well, when I came home, we had 120 acres. And then, the first year that we did this, we made bunch of money because we doubled our yields, and all of a sudden our quality, the chain stores that were buying grapes at that time said, you guys have the best quality of any fruit around. And I'm going like, oh man, I said, thank you, Jesus. And so what took place then is that we bought more land, of course, because the farmer only has two choices when they are successful financially from the crop that they grow. They either pay more taxes or they buy more land. So they have no other choice. And so we, of course, bought more land. And so we went from 120 acres to like 420 acres. And then we went to 800 acres. And then we kept going and going. And so the next thing you know, after about the third or fourth year of doing this, I realized, I says, we're not using any chemicals. So we all of our insect problems that we had virtually disappeared, and leafhoppers and Pacific spider mites and mealybugs and just things that were common occurrences in the table grape people.
Is that because the plant itself was so healthy and strong, it was able to fight off of these things naturally?
The technical term for that is called induced systemic resistance. So if you're able to induce something into the plant to where it systemically can resist any kind of attack, either pathogenetic or insect-wise, then the plant basically stays clean. And the reason, it's just like a person's health. If you eat at, McDonald's every day, and that's your diet for your whole life, you're eventually going to have, cholesterol and heart problems and kidney problems and bladder problems. You're going to have problems, okay? So if you eat healthy, your immune system and everything about your body becomes healthier, and you don't have the problems. Well, it's the same problem or the same situation that we had growing our table grapes. All of a sudden, our insects disappeared, and all of a sudden, any pathogen problems we had disappeared. And I was saying to myself, wow, this is really awesome. So I wasn't, particularly in the situation where I wanted to go ahead and brag to my farmer friends. They all of a sudden started seeing me as a competitor, and they all of a sudden said, well, man, his grapes are in the top 10% of table grapes. What's that guy doing, And of course, when they heard the word limestone, because nobody was using limestone, so he's whacked out on some type of thing, that he's doing.
He's not buried in chemicals.
He's
some new chemical.
He's Chevron Chemical Company, the biggest chemical company in the world that has the smartest scientists and the smartest pathologists and physiologists and nutritionalists of anybody in the world. And well, how could you possibly think that you could be any smarter than those guys. Well, I had Watt McGugan, and he was pretty smart. And of course, he was somewhat singularly minded with limestone, and CO2 was the two things that he brought to the table with me. Then when I looked at organic matter, and so the breakdown of organic matter produces CO2, and CO2 plus water produces carbonic acid, which is the natural acid of the soil that breaks down nutrients so that the nutrients are more available to the plant. And I just said, well, that's nature's way of getting nutrients up into the plant. It's not Chevron Chemicals' way.
Mm-hmm.
That's nature's way of doing it. And so at the time, I just says, I didn't learn that at Fresno State. And I was disappointed that, that there was so much that was left out. And I was basically being brainwashed into the chemical system, which, of course, when I did it the first season, and we went straight chemicals, and it was a disaster. And thank God it was a disaster. Otherwise, none of this would have happened. And so, or praying underneath a grapevine, and the next day having the newspaper article, and the next day the guy shows up at the farm. The next day he gives me all this information that I didn't learn at Fresno State. And so we were moving 2-3 years into the deal, and we were making money, we were growing, and next thing you know, we had the size of the operation was, we were getting big, and we were now becoming a force in the industry and table grape industry. Of course, we were doing it all organically. So on or about the late 70s, around 1978, we were going like, well, we should sell these grapes as organic and see if we could get, some of the stores to buy us and maybe pay us a premium of a couple of dollars a box to, because it means something to the consumer.
Sure.
Well, back then, the whole health movement was just barely kind of taking off. It was like people were not associating their food necessarily with their health and what was going into the food. So if you were spraying a chemical, a nasty pesticide, or putting something in for the nematodes in the soil, or methyl bromide, or methylparathion, or all these nasty chemicals that were being used, nobody was saying much about it until, the environmental working group and a few of the environmental groups that were around then were saying, hey, there's a bunch of stuff in our food that we should be asking questions about. And then, of course, the FDA, they did have minimal tolerances for all these chemicals, but they were basically set by the chemical company.
Right.
They weren't set by them.
Quite a bit of their budget comes from them.
Right. And so it was kind of like a, inside fraternity of good old boys that were basically saying, here's how we're going to do it. And here's what you're going to use. And don't question any of it. And of course, I questioned everything because of the success that I got from Watt McGugan. And I said to myself, wow, I said, this is really interesting. Then I also met another gentleman at the time in early 70s whose name was Ev Dietrich. And Ev Dietrich was an entomologist that was good bugs and bad bugs. And we had hired him to check our bugs and stuff. And he had been on there in the beginning. And then when, of course, we went through this stuff, all of our bad insects just basically disappeared. And he said, what are you doing, Steve? He says, you don't even need me anymore. It's basically put him out of a job. But of course, I didn't kick him off because I wanted to learn about why these insects disappeared. And it's like I was saying, this induced systemic resistance, and how if the insect doesn't have nitrates high enough in the plant, for example, Pacific spider mites, that's what they live off of. If they want to have the nitrates to be high, that's how they go ahead and suck the juices out of the plant so that they can, reproduce and populate and then suck all the juices out of the plant. Well, once I got the limestone in there and the calcium was in there, that didn't work with the physiology of that particular insect, and they basically disappeared overnight. I didn't add one single beneficial insect. They couldn't live sucking off the juice of the plant because the juices in the plant weren't conducive to making them healthy. It made them unhealthy and they died. So when I saw that, I just said to myself, unbelievable. I put limestone on it. I had a neighbor that we had a 50-foot road between each other. He had mites and his vines were getting burned up and my vines were all healthy and green. And I says, oh my gosh, this is not what I was taught at Fresno State. I mean, we're supposed to get, if the neighbor has it, those insects come into your field and they start chewing around on your stuff, and then now you got them, and now everybody has them, and then you got to spray.
And that, what a great unintended experiment, right? You got your field next to his field. His field is getting decimated, and your field is
perfectly fine. And so I said to myself, why, and of course, my first question is, why aren't any of the people at the higher learning institutions, why don't they know this? And if they don't know it, why aren't they open to knowing it? So I go to Fresno State and I says, here's what happened. And I had one lowly professor, Dr. Mays, who was a lowly professor at Fresno State. He was an entomologist. And I told him what happened, that nutritionally I solved the problem of an insect, not between having good bugs and bad bugs, that nutritionally it induced systemic resistance so that the insect wouldn't be there. And he says, well, I've never seen that before. He says, you know what? Come to think of it, now I have seen that before. The places over in Kerman have high limestone in the soil, and they don't have any Pacific spider mites. I was always wondering why they don't have any Pacific spider mites. And so we started piecing this thing together nutritionally from the soil. And all of a sudden, then it became this learning experience of trying to understand, then it was, humates and seaweed and all these other things that nobody was using. And so I had put them on the plant, and the plant just loved everything that we were doing to it. And we had no insect problems to speak of. Mm-hmm. I mean, we had a little bit of touch here and there, but it was nothing that we had to go ahead and spray the heck out of everything and, do these things. But in the beginning, it was a learning process. I did the first 2-3 years, did have to spray some stuff just because I didn't have the ratios right of doing this and that. And once I started getting these ratios correct in the soil, all of a sudden the insect problems virtually disappeared. So now all of a sudden we're farming organically, and nobody's farming organically. They didn't know what the word even meant.
And they weren't marketing the word organic, right?
No, not at all. And so we became a pioneer in being the first organic farmer in the San Joaquin Valley, became a pioneer of trying to sell produce to the produce people organically. So Safeway and Albertsons and, Kroger and all.
What was the education process required to get them to understand it's a superior product?
Well, so what we did is we went to make a presentation. And I'll never forget the presentations. We would go there and they would just absolutely laugh at us. They just laughed us out of the room like, you guys are whacked out. Are you on drugs or something? Or what are you people thinking of here? How nutrition and the plant and not spraying, and we have an FDA and a Department of Agriculture and the big chemical companies that, they wouldn't want to poison people. What's wrong with you? Are you some kind of a radical leftist, commie, whatever? I mean, we were accused of everybody. But
you had an actual product, though, that they could look and taste and and see the difference.
Right. Well, so when we went out in the beginning, like I said, we couldn't get anybody to go in on the organic thing. They laughed at us. I remember Dick Spezzano, who worked for Vaughn's. He liked the concept, but he said, Steve, he says, what happens when you don't have enough grapes for me? What happens when I educate the public that chemicals are bad, and I got this wonderful organic grape, Pavich Family Farms, organic, Pavich organic, and then all of a sudden you guys don't have enough supplies, or when you're done in November and I don't have any grapes till next, June, what are you going to give me? So they were in a very difficult position. So, so when I first started, I says, all of a sudden all the environmental groups jumped all over me. They just loved what I was doing. So now I had these the farm community in Delano and Kern County and Tulare County is very conservative people. Farmers are conservative by nature. They're hard workers. They didn't have anything given to them. They had to make what they have happen. And so with them, it's all about work, hard work, and making it happen, not looking for programs that they can get to give them something for free. So by nature, they looked at this and said, organic farming, Stevie, that's going to make us look bad. So we're spraying these chemicals and you're not spraying them. So I had the farm community, head of the Table Grape Commission, that was just absolutely livid at the fact that we were now going out to the chain stores and trying to sell our grapes as being chemical free and not, organic. And he said that it made the other grape growers look bad. So Bruce Obink, who was the head of the Table Grape Commission, finally, we were getting play. And all of a sudden now, some of the chain stores were going, well, maybe we'll put a little organic section. We call it the organic ghetto, but an organic section. And we were the first anybody that was able to take their product and sell it as organic in a chain store. So that was kind of
but they put you in the back of the bus, though.
Yeah. So they knew that there were consumers out there that wanted that. And, you can say whatever you want about programs and this and that, but the free market system is the best system still to get something moving in the right direction. So what was the free market? I didn't force anybody to buy my grapes, but I had a whole clientele that was out there that said, oh, organic grapes, we're going to buy those. So now the free market was gone, like the grapes were going off the shelf. And the next thing you know, the other grape growers that were using all these chemicals, they were pissed off at me that you're making us look bad. So the head of the Table Grape Commission, okay, I'll never forget, he came down one Saturday morning. He said, Steve, we got to talk. So he got my brother and me at the time, and my brother's in charge of the marketing. I was the grower side of it. And it wasn't as if my brother wasn't part of this whole thing, but he was on the marketing side, and I was the grower. So Bruce Sibley came down on Saturday morning about 10 o'clock and he'd come to the house. We sit in the house. He said, Steve, you can't do this. He says, this is going to make all of the table grape growers look like a bunch of lousy, poisoning chemical growers that is going to make the industry look bad. And I said, so you want me to go ahead and take my business model that I have and say, don't use, I says, I'm just saying that there's no chemical sprayed on mine.
On yours, correct.
I'm not saying that everybody else has chemical sprayed on theirs, that even though it was, that I'm not bad-mouthing the other growers at all.
Let them handle their own marketing.
But the chain stores were going like, we want your grapes. Now in the beginning, it wasn't like that. We were poisoned. Because they felt that it was going to make too much of a dissension.
Right.
And it was too controversial. And then I'll never forget, Jimmy Carter became president, and I was put on a major agriculture, group in Washington, D.C., and I had to go back there, and it was about lowering chemicals on thing, and I was like the head of the committee, and so all of a sudden now it's the newspaper people were going like, hey, what are you doing, man? We want to find out. And LA Times, I have an LA Times article up there about, had my cowboy hat on and I had a mustache back then, and I'm out in the field talking about, and I never ever put down the other growers, well, they're using too many chemicals or they're poisoning people. I said, here's my story. We're working through nutrition, and we don't have to spray any harsh chemicals or of any type. And I says, even though there are organic chemicals, but they're not chemicals that get in, that have a parts per million that gets into your, in your liver or gets into your kidneys or your bladder or something else. They were the chemicals that would dissipate out and become nothing after 5 days. And so, they were not traceable in the plant whatsoever. So we had all this stuff that was going on. I felt really good about it. I said, my little prayer that was underneath the grapevine, I said, has evolved into something way beyond anything that I possibly could have thought was happening. And then I realized that now I'm on a mission from God, that this is what I got to do. And it was never about making money, ever, in the beginning. Anytime, because I sat back here and I said, I remember saying my prayers. I would say my prayers, and God would talk back to me. He said, don't worry about the money. Just do the right thing. And I always kept that in my mind about doing the right thing, what I was doing from the farming standpoint and the soil and everything else. The money just came. We doubled our yields, and then the quality. Then we got into the nutrition thing, and then we said, well, we want to, actually show that we have no parts per million of pesticides in our plant, even though the FDA will allow a certain amount of parts per million of chemicals in a plant of a pesticide, which is not good for you. Okay, you're eating it, but it's at a lower rate, and it's parts per million or parts per billion, and big deal. It's a little bit. It's not going to hurt you, right, Steve? And I knew that wasn't right. I'd rather have 0 parts per million. So we got involved with a company called Nutriclean that did testing of how much parts per million chemicals do you have in your plant. So we certified our grapes as being 0 parts per million of chemicals in the plant. And we had that certified in, and it was part of our selling.
And were you guys a pioneer in these types of organics?
We were a pioneer in that. We were the first ones that did that. And first organic farmer, and the first, a lot of things. The first to use seaweed in agriculture. Nobody was using seaweed. He was using seaweed.
And what is the benefit of seaweed? What did you guys find out about that?
Well, seaweed is the most perfect plant on the planet.
What regards?
It has 72 different traceable, beneficial, nutritional elements in the plant. So when you spray seaweed on, not only do you get all of these beneficial elements, you have the cytokinins, which are beneficial in the antioxidant of the plant and antioxidants. And the next thing you know, our nutritional value of our grapes went from 0 to 100 in 2 seconds. And then we thought about it, said, well, and I'll never forget, I had a book that somebody gave me called The Grape Cure. And it was a book that was written by a lady, Johanna Brandt, Dr. Johanna Brandt, in 1929. And she was from South Africa, and she was feeding table grapes to cancer patients at the time because she was a medical doctor. She thought that there was medicinal purposes in feeding grapes to people that had cancer. And all of a sudden, these people were getting cured of cancer. And so anyway, she did this for years, and then she decided, I need to write a book. And the name of the book was called The Grape Cure. And it was all about having resveratrol, which was anti-cancerous, an antioxidant that would kill cancer. Now, you would have thought that, of course, the nutritionalists, the university, and everybody would be jumping all over this. Oh, no, this is a bunch of hogwash, and you guys are whacked out, and we need to have radiation and chemo, and that's the only way that we're going to get rid of cancer. So I was into that whole thing. And she was still alive. She was like around 89 years old and lived in New York City. And I had a plane ticket to go see her because I wanted to meet Johanna Brandt. And on the way there, the plane ticket, I arrived. She had passed away the day before I got there. And so I never got a chance to meet her because she was quite individual and quite controversial. Now, the Europeans still have, the Italians have La Cura della Uva, which was been started in the 1500s, where they would feed grapes, they would eat grapes to cure all kinds of ailments and stuff. So the resveratrol and the antioxidants that are in grapes were there. The only difference is that those grapes that were used back then were grown organically. Those grapes were grown in the best soil. Those grapes were the type of varieties that were seeded varieties where a lot of the antioxidants that were in. So it was the X factor that, oh, that's a bunch of hogwash. Well, at the university, they use all these chemicals. So when they go ahead and they would check out for resveratrol, oh, there's nothing in there. The grape cure, you can't cure anything with grapes. Well, they were with chemical grapes.
Not the same grape that they were using in 15.
So then that happened. Then I met this guy, Dr. Stan Rhodes, who was into the whole nutritional content of that and the pesticide residues and everything. He said, oh, Steve, we're going to make this thing happen, man. And we're going to go ahead and do it. And so I'll never forget, we went back to Stop and Shop back east, Boston, with him, and we made a presentation about having no pesticides in the thing, and they loved it. They absolutely loved it. But they said, we just don't know how we can do this without making everybody else look bad.
Right.
And so I was going, oh, yeah, I know. That was the same thing with Vaughn's. It's the same thing with everybody. So being the only, organic grower at the time, I was like by myself. So I needed to have somebody else in the deal. So there was a carrot grower in Bakersfield area, Arvin, California, by the name of Danny Duncan. And Danny heard about me. And he called me up and he said, Steve, you come down here. He says, I need some help in my carrots. I just was wondering what you were doing. So I went down and I helped Danny out. He says, oh, man. He says, I want to do this. I want to have organic carrots. And I says, good. I said, I'll help you out, Danny, and we'll work together. And so anyway, we got together and did a whole thing. And next thing I knew, I had an ally. Okay. And then the other one was wine grape growers. I says I needed to get some wine grape growers in this organic thing. And so I had Frog's Leap Vineyards. And I knew a guy up there by the name of Frank Lees who ran the operation. He said, Steve, he says, you need to come up here and help John Williams, the owner of Frog's Leap, on doing this organic thing. He wants to do this organic thing. Now, he was nothing at the time. And this was in the early 70s. So I'll never forget, I went up there and talked to John. John just sucked it up and just said, "This is it. I'm doing it organically." And so now I had an ally, and I had a few of those guys up there, and then I had a few of the vegetable growers were doing it too now. So now there was more. So now the chain stores, of course, were looking at this thing and saying, this actually may happen, and it may be something that can, turn into a really good thing marketing wise, and we can make some money off of it,
And they can actually have a section of organic
right
produce
the organic,
rather than just grapes sitting in the corner, making the other grapes look bad.
Yeah, the organic ghetto. Yeah,
the organic ghetto.
So all of a sudden, we were kind of on our way, but it still wasn't taking place. And so we got a call one day from Meryl Streep, the movie actress Meryl Streep. And Meryl Streep started the group called Mothers and Others. And what Meryl Streep did was to bring to the acknowledgement or education-wise to the American public that there was chemicals in our food system. And Mothers and Others was about, buying organic produce in the thing. And so we got together and, oh, wow, here's Meryl Streep. She's just all like, completely embraced us. And so next thing you know, Hollywood was kind of looking at this and, and then it was like, wow, this is be good. And then I heard a guy, Eddie Albert, he had heard about me and called me up and wanted to come and see my vineyards. So I brought Eddie Albert down there, and so we became good friends. Of course, he'd invite me down to his house and show me around Hollywood. And of course, I was starstruck because this is Eddie Albert, and he knew everybody. And so,
but not a bad place to get the word out.
Not a bad place to get the
organics.
word out. So then, we had Rayleigh's supermarket that's up in the Sacramento Bay Area, embraced our whole organic thing and said, "Steve, we love what you're doing." And so they wanted to do a television commercial, Rayleigh's television commercial, with me in it. And I said, "Wow, this is cool. I'm going to be on television.
You're going to be Hollywood."
And then so the guy that was up there, I forget what his name was, but anyway, he says, "Well, who do you know around? You know anybody in Hollywood that that knows what you're doing?" I said, "Yeah, Eddie Albert." And next thing you know, they're calling out Albert, and I said, "Eddie, will you do a television commercial with Steve Pavich? We want to do this commercial about his organic grapes and stuff." And so the next thing I know, we're out in the field with the cameras, and here I am, and here's Eddie Albert going, "Hey, Steve, and what are these grapes?" And I said, "Well, these are organic grapes, Eddie, and they've been sprayed with no pesticides and this and that." And so we did this great commercial, and so they showed it entire Northern California, San Francisco Bay Area, San Jose, Oakland, Napa Valley. And I had people from college, calling me, "Hey, I saw you on TV, Steve, with Eddie Albert." He says, and so
that organic thing's working out for you.
So I felt like I became a movie star at that time. Of course, it wasn't. I mean, it was like no big deal.
Bit of kind of recognition that what you did with organics is actually taken off. It's actually becoming mainstream.
And of course, it doubled the sales of their grapes consumption in there. And then all of a sudden, Ralph's and Vaughn's jumped on the bandwagon. And Ralph says, "Look we want to buy our grapes." So they start buying, and they really liked our grapes. And then all of a sudden, Cesar Chavez came along. This was like around 1982, I think, somewhere around there. And he wanted to boycott table grapes because of the pesticides that were on table grapes.
Mm.
And it was a bad thing. And of course, all the table grape growers were within the FDA standards, and we're not spraying that much pesticides, and you guys are blowing this out of proportion. And it was a bad thing for the growers.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't deserve that. So Cesar Chavez started a campaign that the grapes were poison, poison, poison. Well, what about organic grapes? And says, Cesar, you have an organic table grape growers right in your backyard, Steve Pavich, that is growing organic table grapes. What about them? He says, oh, he's cheating.
He's cheating.
He's cheating.
What was the justification for that accusation?
Well, because he didn't want to have anybody. Because if there's one table grape grower that's okay, that means that there could be others, and there could be others, and there could be a movement that could take place to make to all of a sudden half the table grape growers are organic, and now the boycott wouldn't be effective because you're.
Why was he so
okay
against
organic.
the table grape community besides the pesticides?
How you what?
Why was he so against the table grape community, if not for the pesticides?
It happened to be the place that he was born and raised in Delano, and that he decided to start his union. It was also a place where the agriculture community was successful, so that the workers could actually pay dues. You don't want to go into unsuccessful agriculture area where farmers are barely surviving and the farm workers are barely surviving,
Right.
and then they got to pay dues.
There's no money in it.
So it was a money thing with Chavez. He says, well, we'll do it right here in Delano, and it's compact, and there's no other table grapes growing anyplace else except there in Delano at that time of the year. So here all of a sudden you have this guy that has organic grapes, and he just kind of shoved it off the side, said, you're cheating. So Ralph's, as a chain store, they were boycotting. And so they were, all of a sudden, the chain stores decided not to buy table grapes. And the table grape industry was going, well, if they don't buy our table grapes, we're going to be forced to sign with Cesar Chavez. So the boycott of table grapes was working.
And the idea is to unionize the table grape industry.
To unionize the table grape workers. So anyway, what happened is that Ralph said, well, we're going to buy organic table grapes that don't have any pesticides on them from Steve Pavich Family Farms. And so my brother and I, we went down there and we told him, he says, can you provide us enough grapes for the whole season? I said, yeah. So they exclusively bought our table grapes, not from any other growers, only from us for the whole season. Now, you would think that some of our competitors that were big customers of Ralph's, because Ralph's was, I think, the number 4 chain store at the time. They were huge. And so they would buy from a lot of our competitors in the table grapes. And all of a sudden now, I'm sorry, and I won't mention any names, but we can't buy your grapes because they got chemicals on them. But we can buy Steve Pavich's grapes, and that's
the guy that's cheating.
Yeah,
right.
The guy that's cheating, yeah. That we're going to buy his table grapes because they're clean. So we had an entire season, yep, 2 truckloads, yep, another 2 truckloads, yep. I mean, it was just like a slot machine. We didn't have to market anything. We were getting these orders every week, from Ralph's, and it was a lot. So all of a sudden we were going like, wow, this is finally paying off. And plus we were getting a $2 premium when we did that. And
so the premium with the actually ended up working out.
Yeah.
Doing it this way.
So when we went back to the marketing people at Ralph's, because we wanted to know, did they actually increase consumption? Did more people actually buy table grapes than what they normally bought over the last 10 years?
Which is the most
average?
important statistic.
Yeah.
Is it a better product? Is the consumer enjoying this?
Are they consuming more of those grapes? Well, we were 17% improvement in sales, which is huge. So if you look at $1 million worth of grapes being sold on that thing and it's 17%, it becomes a big number.
$170,000.
So anyway, when that happened, we knew that we were in the right place. And then the other chain store says, well, we can't let this go unchallenged. We're going to have to buy organic grapes too. And then the next thing you know, I had a neighbor, I'll never forget, Sunview Vineyards, Marco Zananovich, and one of my best friends, Max Shaley, who was the etymologist at a vineyard right next to us. And Max was watching everything we were doing, and he was really good because he knew bugs, and he was going, "Oh, that's what you do for that. Oh, that's what you do." So
you're educating the entomologist.
Yeah, we're educating them, and that's fine.
Yeah,
that was my mission. Okay, what am I supposed to do, God? Well, here's what you're supposed to do. So the next thing I know, Sunview Vineyards decided that they're going to get and grow some table grapes out of their acreage. They were the largest table grape grower at the time. And so they decided to put in organic table grapes. And we were a bit freaked out because he says, oh man, we're going to lose our markets. We're going to do this or that. But I will have to say that Marco, the owner, went in and says, Steve, we're not going to compete with you. The market is huge. We're going to go in markets that you're not in. I don't want to compete with you. I don't want to cut the price. I want to keep the price good so we both make money. And there's enough there's enough cake for both of us to eat it. Back to this about, Sunview Vineyards, them putting some acreage in organically, and Max Shaley, my friend, and we were really nervous, like I said, that they were going to undercut the price, or they were going to take some of our customers. They did none of that. They actually expanded the market, and they had their own markets, and they sold, and they didn't cut the price ever. So we were happy campers. They were happy campers.
It helped to grow awareness.
Yes,
awareness about it as well. Yeah.
It increased the awareness, and their marketing people were selling it too. And so that was like, it actually increased our presence in the marketplace. Now, all of a sudden, there were other chain stores that were going like, hey, what kind of program do you got? And then next thing you know, we had these real sophisticated programs. My brother's wife, Tonya Pavich, at the time, she was really good at marketing, and she had a unique gift at being able to get buyers in the produce industry to talk to her
and understand what you guys are doing.
And she was really good at the presentation. And so her and I would actually go out on the road and sell them. And she would go in there and introduce them, and she'd give the front. And then, Steve, give us your line of thought. And then I'd give it to her. And then you go, oh, this is a great story. And, and so they all jumped on board. And then, like I said, we had a competitor that jumped in, but he was on board too. And then next thing you know, there was another couple growers, and the next thing another couple, and then pretty soon there was a lot of people doing it. And basically it increased the marketplace of more people were buying it. It was diluting the chemical side of it and replacing the chemical side with the organic side.
Well, and like you talked earlier, the free market, right? The consumers were choosing.
Right.
And what's interesting, this is 50 years ago, and look where we are today with organics. It's a major industry.
Well, the free marketplace is you vote with your dollar.
That's right.
Okay.
But you're not going to vote with your dollar if the product itself isn't quality, and you're not going to pay a premium for that product if it isn't worthy of the premium.
Yeah,
and you proved you're a pioneer in this. There's major Whole Foods. These chains are based on clean, organic, high nutrient foods that wasn't even thought of when you guys started this.
Well, the thing of it is that, and I'm not trying to talk down the 2-acre growers or 5-acre growers, but the quality of the fruit, the appearance didn't look right. The uniqueness about our table grapes that we had is that the appearance of the fruit looked, in the top 10%, a bright color to it, and the color green was really green. It was a whitish green, and the skin had waxes on it, and there was all these the stems had a brown stem and yellowish stem and green, and which was all denotes quality. So we had people buying our grapes that didn't even know that they were organic. They were buying it because the quality was better than anybody else's. I'm not saying everybody's, but we were, like I said, in that top 10%.
You were a top 10%
And
grower.
there was other growers that were in there too, and they were going, how's this guy doing this? He's doing this organically, and he must be cheating.
I love the cheating. I love the cheating accusation.
Because they weren't doing it. And
Right.
again, it's
Hey, listen, if you can't win the argument, call names.
it's like anything else. If you have a lack of information
Mm-hmm.
that's coming to you, and if you go to the university and you ask them about organics, oh yeah, organic, yeah, that's for those 2-acre hippie growers. That was their whole attitude. But hey, this guy in Delano is doing it on 800 acres.
And he's providing
2,000.
a supply chain to major grocers.
Yeah, well, 2,000 acres. Then, like I said, we kept growing and growing, and until we got to 5,000 acres, and now we were, one of the largest table grape growers in the deal organically. So with us, we were there was no stopping us now.
You must be extremely proud when you look where the organic industry is today, knowing that you were a pioneer in it.
Well, we in the middle 80s, we realized that we needed to have a really good marketing company. That's where Tom's wife, Tonya, had developed our marketing so that we could sell direct to the chain stores. We didn't go through a broker or anything else. And so that was a big deal. And then all of a sudden now we had a presence in the marketplace, and our name was everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Packer, which is the produce industry Wall Street Journal, it's called the Packer. We were in there all the time. There was stuff about, this organic guy, this organic this, and what about nutrition, and what about, pesticide residues, and what about all these things. And so I was the go-to person that would happen with that. And so it was really good public relations for us, because anybody that wanted to get into, the organic thing into their chain stores, they came to us. Well, that's when we decided, says, we need more than just table grapes. And we were growing oranges, some oranges, not very much. And so we had some organic oranges, and we had some organic cotton in Arizona. Believe it or not, we were the first organic cotton grower in the United States. And this was 1978.
Now, cotton's not an edible product.
Yes, but
it is a product you put on your body.
Well, at the time, it was the most sprayed plant of any commodity that was out there. So they sprayed it so much, they would have like 11, 12 times a season they'd spray with a nasty pesticide. And so you'd have a certain amount of parts per million that was in the linen itself.
Yeah.
So cotton is sitting there
on your body all day.
All of a sudden it's on your body, and so next thing you know, oh my gosh, the FDA, they're looking at cotton, and there's, and then the cotton growers got really sensitive about this whole thing. And, fortunately they made it by the skin of their teeth of not having it blow up in their face because they were spraying so much. And then they started using alternative chemicals that weren't as harsh. So it forced them to do things, let's say not as organic, but not as harsh and not as many times. So I felt good. I felt really good about all of this for myself personally.
And I find interesting is the mission, or it wasn't started to try to create this health movement. You were just trying to save the damn farm.
I was just trying to save.
You were just trying to save the farm. It's like our
crop
crop is dying. I've done everything right, everything I learned. I studied the chemicals. I'm using the chemicals, and we're dying.
Yeah, I mean, to grow from 120 acres to 5,000 acres is not exactly an easy process, because it costs so much for the bare land, and then to plant the grapes, and then to train them and do all these things that you get them to actually harvest. So, and then we also had, like I said, other growers that we pursued in the vegetable industry to grow organic for us, and we would market their product.
And you created a coalition.
Yeah, so the next thing you know, we had 7 growers, and the next thing you know, we had 35 growers, and then now also we had 75 growers.
Do you know what the market cap is for organics just in the United States? It's got to be in the billions, right?
No, it's around 30 billion, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a big number now.
From a few acres of grapes to now a major industry in the United States. And it's going to get bigger, especially with the focus that we have, the education that we have
on health,
on
personal health.
Now we have Bobby Kennedy going in as the HHS director, and that's been something that he's been
make America healthy.
Yeah,
again.
He's been all about the chemicals in our foods and eating correctly. But his voice has been just pushed down. Now he's going to have a front and center stage, and you were a pioneer in it. I think that you're going to. I'm very optimistic that over the next, hopefully, 4 years, we're going to see some major, at least, education on what we're putting into our bodies. When I grew up, they said you are what you eat. Well, we are what we eat, and to eliminate these chemicals that get into our bodies. Perhaps it will eliminate a lot of the medical issues that we have. Perhaps it'll eliminate some of the sicknesses. Education, as you had to do 50 years ago in this industry, hopefully it's going to be front and center with this new administration.
That was the other thing, too, is that when my dad was using all the sprays and my mom and everybody in the household, we'd get sick 2-3 times a year, get the nasty flus and everything. And when we quit spraying everything, okay, all of a sudden, our household, we never got sick.
Mm-mm.
And, my mom, she never got sick. My dad never got sick. And what is that? I mean, my wife, Lucy, when I first met her, she wasn't eating organic, but she started eating organic. And she would get 2-3 times a year, she'd get a cold. And next thing you know, she never gets a cold now. She can sit there and go the whole season, no cold, season after season after season. We're exposed to it.
Well, it's a cute cliche, you are what you eat, but it is a 100% fact. You are 100% what you eat.
But the thing of it is, how does that happen? The antioxidants that are in our table grapes are higher. The nutritional content, at first I didn't think, I says, well, when I went to the university, I said, what's in grapes? He says, there's sugar.
Sugar and water, little fiber?
Sugar and water and fiber. And I said, we should be selling it because of the grape cure, going back to Johanna Braun. And I says about resveratrol and how it's an antioxidant that's high. So at the time when I was working with NutriClean and Dr. Stan Rhodes, I says, Stan, we need to check my neighbor's grapes to see what the content is of resveratrol in it. So he says, oh, yeah, absolutely. He says, we need to find out how good or bad it is.
Sure.
So we would test ours, and 350% higher resveratrol in it. It wasn't like 20%. It was running 200% and 300% higher. And I'm going like, wow, this is incredible. So now the differentiation isn't like 20 to 25, 5% higher than my neighbor or 7% higher. It was 200 to 300% higher. So that's when we got into NutriClean and said, well, we're going to make the claim. So we went to the FDA, said, we're going to do this. And so went back to Washington, D.C., we had meetings, had Dr. Cheryenko, who was head of FDA, and he was going to okay it, that we could actually make this claim.
The resveratrol?
Well, it wasn't just resveratrol, but the actual nutrition in our table grapes was higher than anybody else's. And that, well, it would make the other grape growers look bad.
Right.
So anyway, we were saying, you know what, the heck with it. We're going for it. If I really want this organic thing to happen, this is the way it's going to happen, because you're getting value. Just not just the pesticides, but you're getting a nutritional value that's greater. So the last minute before we do it, they call us back to DC, and Dr. Cheryenko comes in and he says, Steve, we can't grant this. The FDA says we can't grant it.
And what was their reasoning? It would hurt the grape industry?
Well, they wouldn't tell me publicly in the meeting. Then I had to get them, and I'm not going to say who said it.
That's fine.
The guy says, you know what a threat it would be if you were able to make that claim and the rest of the industry look like a bunch of poison sellers, and you're sitting here all clean and happy and your nutritional content's higher, and they're over here sitting down here. You're not going to let that happen. You're going to destroy the industry. So
good for the FDA looking out for our food.
So here's what they did grant us. They said, if you test every box and have documentation that every box, the nutritional higher content is higher, we'll grant you that. Well, the test for doing that is like $45. Well, I'm selling my grapes for, $13 a box, and I got to test it for $45 a box.
Well, they knew that.
Well, they knew that.
Of course they did.
And they knew that was, but they were playing innocent. Like, well, we'll let you have it, but you have to test every grape box. And I says, are you guys crazy? And so that was just a few of the many, many things that we were dealing with FDA. I mean, I knew all those guys by first name. State of California, the most tested grape ever in the history of the state of California was Pavich Family Farms. And the reason that it was tested, because at the time, the governor of the state of California, this was after Jerry Brown, Duke Mason, the head of the Department of Ag said, well, they were all saying we were cheating.
Yeah, the accusation is hilarious.
So they're saying this guy's cheating. So the Department of Agriculture tests every month, 3 or 4. They'll just go to a supermarket and they'll just randomly select somebody's grapes and test it and see if it has any pesticide residues in it. And as long as it's within the tolerance, it's all fine. That's what food testing is about. They do it right now with the FDA and the Department of Agriculture. They do food testing just to make sure that our food is safe for us to eat.
Within their standards.
So
that are established by the chemical companies. All of a sudden,
I get a call from a friend of mine that's in the Department of Agriculture. And he said, Steve, what are you doing? I says, what do you mean? He says, we're testing your grapes 40 times a month. He says, they're in the supermarket looking for Pavich Family Farm grapes only, and nobody else's grapes, and we're testing it. I said, what are you doing? I says, well, we have no residues. And he says, I know. They think you're cheating. So they
so they thought perhaps you figured out a way to mask.
Yeah. Well, there's no way to mask it.
Right, but is that what their motivation was, to test you 40 times more?
Their motivation was to catch me, that I was cheating, and that they would catch me with pesticide residues, and then that would be it.
And you shut you down.
Yeah, then they shut me down for making that claim. So we had NutriClean in there defending us all the way. I mean, had our grapes tested. Oh, they were tested. Every field got tested, background and this and that. So we had our guns loaded at all times.
Anybody ever try to sabotage your field?
Well, that's the interesting thing. It turns out that Cesar Chavez, and of course I have no proof of this, but it just so happens that down in Los Angeles at Vaughn's, they were doing testing of grapes, and they found some grapes of ours that had residue in it of a particular pesticide. And I said, well, that can't be. It was this very low amount, like 5 parts per million. You could put 200 parts per million, but but they found the residue in it. So I'll never forget, we went down there and we had Nutriclean, which was the certifying company. They were down there. They were all over this. They said, give us that pallet that you pull those grapes from. And they pulled it. And there was only one box that had this. The rest of the boxes were all clean. So here's one box, suspiciously had a very minor amount of chemical residue.
That specifically got tested.
So then we had to go back to the employees and had to go back into the store that it happened to come from. It happened to be in the Hispanic section of Los Angeles. And this and that is like, did somebody actually fill something up and spray it? So we thought that that's what they did. Of course, we made a big deal out of it. So that same pallet, we checked every single box. There's 0 pesticide residue. That box is the only one that had. How can that be? So they were going like, well, yeah, I don't know how. And then it kind of like, it would have been way too controversial to start, saying that, well, Cesar Chavez sprayed it or somebody else did or a competitor did or a chemical company did, or who knows.
Right, start pointing the finger would be too controversial, sure.
All of a sudden it was dropped. We never heard a single thing from it, and we never had a pesticide residue after that ever again. So there was a lot of things that we had to go through personally, that we had enemies.
You were shaking up the industry.
The industry hated us.
Sure.
Okay.
You weren't the status quo, and the consumers were liking it.
Oh, and the university, the ag schools hated us.
Well, they were getting their funding from the chemical companies.
Yeah, and they weren't doing any research in organic at all. Zero.
Well, no,
at the time. And so then there became a little bit. And of course,
before you too, there was no money in it.
And you'd had places like University of Santa Cruz. Okay, well, they're doing some stuff. There's a bunch of hippies, right? So they love to have a little bit of organic. And one of my best friends, and I got to mention him, God bless him, he's on the other side now, but Amigo Bob Contasano. Amigo Bob was a hippie that was involved in the food movement of organic. And he was one of my science collaborators on organic. When we met, first time we met at a university function, and then we became lifelong friends. I mean, he's got long dreadlock hairs, and Amigo and I were just like brothers for the rest of our life. I mean, best of friends. And he says, I can't believe I have a big grower that I'm friends with. Because they wanted everybody to be a 5-acre grower.
Sure.
And I says, well, we'll all starve to death, Amigo. And we never argued that point because we loved each other as brothers.
You also saw the success in what you're doing on a larger scale.
Oh, yeah. No.
And then it was possible.
Yeah, and so there was these unique individuals like Amigo and I had all the hippie people that were doing organic, and so we were all collaborating, and all of a sudden, I would be a guy that would come in, all groomed up with a nice Tommy Bahama shirt and, dressed up nice, and I'd walk into these research sessions that they'd have that were all hippies. And I'd walk in there and then they'd go, well, you're a big grower. I mean, the first thing they'd say, you're a big grower. What are you doing in here? Then all of a sudden I won them over. And next thing you know, they all became my best friends. So the hippies loved me. And they were like, they knew I wasn't cheating because that was the thing. Well, he's got to be cheating. And everybody just thought that.
I love that.
Thank God, and I wasn't cheating because I knew that wasn't the right thing to do. And so when all this stuff was going on, it was just a chatter. It didn't matter whether it was the university. Steve Pavich, he's Satan. Oh, the chemical companies. Steve Pavich just says, oh, yeah, oh, my God, he's awful.
Well, you're an industry disruptor.
And then you had any of the chain stores that weren't doing organic. Oh, Steve Pavich, he's a crazy whack job. And we were in the beginning of all of that stuff. And then the next thing like I said, the marketplace prevailed. People spoke with their dollars. Next thing Vons wasn't going to let Ralph's take their lunch. And, Rayleigh's was, kicking Northern California. And Safeway was the last one.
Mm-hmm.
They just didn't like the fact that we were like forced to buy from organic, as opposed to, and then of course the certification, and I was on the original one.
Yeah, because when you started, there was no
it was all
certifications.
started. There was somebody says, well, "What is organic anyway? It's what? No spraying or what? And of course, I wanted the nutritional part to be part of it. Then next thing you know, the state of California, Jerry Brown got in there and he said, "Look, I'm going to put this committee on." He said, "You need to write a law. You need to write the law, the organic law." So there was me and 12 other people that were on the original committee, a bunch of hippies and myself, and I think and so we every 4 months we were 2 days writing this law, and I got to give Zia Sonia Benz credit. She was one of the women that was involved in it. She was also a very small organic grower, and Zia was just like absolutely brilliant. She could write anything, and she knew how to put it the right way. I could never. Oh, that's not a writer. I can't put anything down correctly, and so I'd conceptually give it to her. And I said, "Yeah, well, if we do this, oh yeah, here's how we should write it." And then we had the hippies that were on, and we don't want a farmer to be over 10 acres. And I said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Don't you want everybody to be farming organically, whether they're small, big, or little, or
Sure.
whatever it is?" I said, everybody should be. Aren't you committed to that? Well, yeah, we're committed to being organic, but we want everybody to be small. I said, that's not the way it works. So we got through that too. And all of a sudden I was accepted by them as being, at the time it was 800 acres, and then we grew to 2,500 acres. And so we wrote this law, first one in 1978. It was called the Organic Food Act for the state of California. And it was what everybody, went by
In order to
after
be
that.
organically certified at the time.
Including on a national level, because most of the organic at the time was California,
Right. Well,
hippies.
Sure.
And so then of course, I was farming in Arizona, I was the first organic farmer in Arizona. And so I said, well, what the heck? And next thing you know, some of the vegetable guys there says, yeah, well, where the vegetable capital is Yuma, Arizona. And some of them said, well, that's a free marketplace, man. We could go for it. And then next thing you know, there was more growers involved. And so it happened. So once the law was written in 78, we had a blueprint that you had to adhere to in order to be an organic farmer. And it was pretty specific.
Mm-hmm.
It also had certification by certification companies that were established at the time. And the first one was the California Organic Farmers Organization, CCOF. And CCOF started off as a kind of like a little hippie operation, certifying little 5-acre guys. And all of a sudden they have this 800-acre guy, and they said, he's got to be cheating.
It keeps coming back.
That was always the first thing. He's got to be cheating because he's too big, because you can't do organic on a big scale. And so I had to go through this, and that's when I become really good friends with my good buddy Amigo. He came down there and he saw what I was doing. He says, wow, because you're actually doing it on a large scale. And I says, well, yeah. I says, because it works. That's why I'm not doing it. I'm not doing all of this spraying. I wasn't doing any spraying.
Mm-mm.
In other words, you had
The plants were doing the
organic.
work.
You had organic chemical sprays that you could use and stuff, but I wasn't needing it, and that's what blew me away. And
You built
so
the plant.
all of
You built the plant's health
So
from the
the
inside out.
etymology people, the bug people, were going like, well, how can that be? Induced systemic resistance. The plant internally was setting off all of these auxins and hormones and stuff, so that the insect just didn't
Stayed
want to
away.
have that vanilla ice cream that you were producing. They wanted the chemical vanilla ice cream that had all these chemicals in it. Okay, they didn't want this organic vanilla ice cream. So we had no insects, And like I said, my Everett Dietrich, we call him Deke, he was going, man, Steve. And he would just be blown away. And he says, I'm going to be out of business if everybody does it like this. I can't sell them good bugs. I says, no, but you're an entomologist and they pay for your service. You'll be fine. He was. I mean, it wasn't like he went out of business. And so, because a lot of people, that's the first thing they think of. How's this going to affect my business?
Well, yeah, it is a business.
The conventional guys didn't like it because it's going to take part of their marketplace away. Well, what it actually did was expand the market. So all of this,
it gives the consumer more choice.
The consumer had a choice. And they voted with their dollar. And so then all of a sudden this movement's going.
And the organic movement is winning. And I think it's going to be out. I think we're going to see, I think it's going to come right down to the education process of people understanding what perhaps these pesticides may be doing to their body and give them the opportunity to now understand that they have a choice and go organic, perhaps be less sick, be healthier, get more nutrition per bite, etc.
I'm going to give you an example on that very point. Okay. The USDA has $200 million worth of grants that they hand out. This was back in, I think it was the late 70s or early 80s. And so $200 million is a lot of money.
Especially in the 70s and 80s.
So you're going to see how a corn plant works, or you're going to see how a soybean works, or you're going to see how this lettuce plant works, or you're going to do this or that. So they had this $200 million worth of research. So out of $200 million, how much money do you think was being spent on organic agriculture at that time?
No guess, no clue.
$10,000.
Was that one of the half-acre farms somewhere in Santa Cruz?
It was some. They were just throwing it to some hippie deal,
just to say they did,
to quiet, make them be quiet. We're giving you grants, $10,000, a lot of money. Anyway, so when that happened, everybody was sitting here going, "Why is this? Why are we doing the work of the chemical company?" It was all research that was benefiting the chemical companies. So they didn't, the last thing they wanted was organic to get a foothold in this thing. So they had all kinds of people that they hired to, try to make organic look bad, and residue samples and this and that, and they couldn't find anything. And that was, then all of a sudden, Chevron Chemical Company says, well, we have a seaweed that we can sell you. Hey, our gibberellic acid is organic. Hey, our Bacillus thuringiensis biological is organic. So vote with your dollar. All of a sudden, the free marketplace was even affecting the chemical companies.
Wow.
So they weren't stupid.
No, and it's business.
And they fought it just to hold off, to give them time to get organized internally so that they could have the people within their operation to be able to do something like organic. So it was fun to watch, And then I knew I was right, because when I had the chemical companies going like,
yep,
we got to change, it was like you knew that you were on the right track. I just wanted to do my thing.
You were doing your thing, yeah. And it eventually upended an industry and opened people's eyes and created a potentially $30 billion organic industry in America.
Exactly, and growing, and growing. And it's going to continue to grow. And of course, the chemical industry owns that. And it's all about supply and demand. In other words, if there's enough people buying beneficial chemicals, the chemical industry is going to say, well, we don't need to make harsh chemicals. We can make nice, good organic chemicals. And yeah, we're okay with seaweed. We can use it. And it's a nice product to have because it's a perfect food for the plant. So they had all these things that were just like really, I can imagine what their board of directors meetings were like at that time. Like, what the heck is this organic crap.
Mhm.
You know,
We have the smartest people in the world
we have
figuring
the
out how to
smartest
make
people. What do you
these
guys think?
chemicals that are
All
supposed to
those guys
work.
are all a bunch of hippies.
They don't know anything.
You know, they don't know what they're doing.
Of course,
And-
before the chemical companies, for tens of thousands or millions of years, we've been growing and taking care of our food supply
Right.
chain without the chemicals.
So it was an evolution, and of course, like I said, we were making money, and so we didn't care. We were paying our bills and feeling good about what we were doing, and we became, cheerleaders.
Mm-hmm. You wrote the organic law.
Yeah.
You
Helped.
you helped
Yeah.
write it. You petitioned the FDA on many different things in Washington, D.C., trying to get the education
Residues
out
and,
there. So,
yeah.
the education, people are aware and people are eating healthier, and the industry has grown tremendously from when you guys started. And I think we're going to see another increase in awareness over the next 4 years with Bobby Kennedy making America healthy again. Which that's something I can get behind, and I think a lot of people will.
Well, look, we've been taught that for years and years, ever since you're a little kid, like if you get sick, what pill am I supposed to take?
Mhm.
It's not like, how can I build my immune system? Oh my gosh, what kind of a question is that? How can I build my immune system? Food? What do you mean? Are you connecting the nutrition of food and chemicals in food to your general health? I said, yes, I am.
Mhm.
Now, there's, they have, of course, they didn't do any studies. Well, you have nothing to prove it. I said, that's because you guys have never studied it.
Yeah.
And you don't want to study it
It's
because
not in the best interest of
ants-
anybody to have a simple thing like nutrition to be medicinal.
Oh my gosh. If you're spending billions and billions of dollars on pills to get you healthy, and as opposed to eating a lot of leafy green vegetables and more fruits and okay, clean meat with not loaded up with a bunch of antibiotics and other things like it. And the thing, the side effect of all this, it was one thing to have the organic movement going, but the conventional agriculture began cleaning up their act. Okay,
Sure.
so it's like, well, maybe we don't need all these chemicals that we're putting in. At least if we get less, we'll have the FDA off our back.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're not going to be looking at us so closely. So all the farmers
And they're not trying to poison people. They're just trying to get their product out there, and they're working within the laws and within the FDA regulations.
Exactly. Oh,
But
yeah.
as people get more and more educated about it, the further they can get away from that, they found to be beneficial for their business.
Right. So as this has evolved now, 30 billion, and it's going to go higher. And as people become educated and they make America healthy again, and we have people talking within conservative arenas and liberal arenas and libertarian arenas and all these different arenas where this is not a political issue.
No, the health is not.
But
it's been politicized,
it's been politicized,
right.
but it shouldn't be. So
no, it affects everybody, regardless of where you stand on any side of any issue.
Yes.
Your health, what you eat, it's universal. We have to eat.
Yes.
Well, listen, we're going to finish up. And Steve, you've been extremely generous with your time. And I hope that this will keep pushing the conversation forward. And people are going to really enjoy the details. I learned a lot. I had no idea how into the organic movement you were.
And I wanted one final thing, going back to the very beginning as being a mission from God. I mean, if I didn't have all those problems to begin with, because you only learn when you have problems.
That's right.
Of how to solve a problem. And then you're so desperate to where you're actually saying a prayer to asking God, like, please help me out. And then next thing you know, there's a newspaper article that you're reading, and next thing you know, you're off to the races and doing something that is a good thing to do. Feel good about it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my whole life has been like, I don't feel bad about it. I don't like the fact that maybe other farmers have gotten hurt in the market's plate a little bit or this or that, but it's also been an incentive for them to jump in, and they all have.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a grower and you don't have an organic program, you're in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
So they all have to have an organic program now to satisfy the marketplace, and that they compete with each other, and we get a better product and we get a better price for it, and it's not so expensive to
You started off
consumer.
trying to just save your mom and dad's farm,
That's what I
and
was
you
on.
turned it out providing
disaster.
great nutrition to tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people, and helped pioneer the organic movement. Thank you, Steve. I really appreciate your time.
You're welcome.
This was fantastic.
All right.
Great information. Thank you so
All
much.
right. Thank you.
You've been listening to Real People, Real Life. Our passion is to have real conversations with real people who've made it. Real people who've made it, who did it on their own terms. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, catch us on Twitter or X at RPRL Podcast and on YouTube at Real People, Real Life Podcast.